The modern crisis of ambition is not a lack of opportunity, but a catastrophic leakage of psychic energy into voids of digital scrolling and adult content. To understand why your drive has vanished, we must look at the brain not as a computer, but as a biological engine that runs on a finite fuel, dopamine. Carl Jung spoke of the libido not just as sexual energy, but as a total creative life force of the human being. When you spend hours mindlessly scrolling or consuming artificial intimacy, you're essentially bleeding out your libido. You are taking the very fire required to build a kingdom and throwing it into a bottomless pit of cheap, simulated rewards. By the time you turn your attention to your real-world goals, the engine is cold and the tank is empty. You aren't lazy, you are psychologically bankrupt. The mechanism of cheap dopamine through scrolling is a form of digital possession. Every swipe is a micro-gamble, a search for a novelty that never truly satisfies. This creates a state of chronic hyperstimulation where the real world, with its slow progress and delayed rewards, starts to feel gray and unbearable. Jung warned that man cannot stand a meaningless life, yet we have replaced meaning with engagement. Ambition requires the ability to endure boredom and friction, but scrolling has rewired your brain to demand instant gratification every 6 seconds. You have traded your ability to conquer reality for the ability to be entertained by a screen, turning yourself from a creator into a consumer who is perpetually hungry but never full. The impact of porn on ambition is even more profound, as it strikes at the very root of the biological drive to succeed. From an evolutionary perspective, a man's drive to build, to acquire status, and to conquer obstacles is largely fueled by the subconscious desire to be a viable partner and provider. When you consume porn, you are tricking your ancient lizard brain into believing you have already achieved the ultimate biological victory. The brain receives a massive flood of neurochemicals that signal success without you having moved a muscle. This creates a state of psychological castration. Why would the psyche bother with the grueling work of starting a business or mastering a craft when it can receive the reward of victory in a dark room with a click? You have hijacked your own survival instinct, and as a result, your ambition withers because the brain sees no reason to fight for what it thinks it already has. This leads to what Jungian psychologists call the Puer Aeternus, or the eternal boy. The Puer is a man who refuses to grow up, who stays in a world of fantasy and play because he is terrified of the reality principle. Scrolling and porn are the ultimate tools of the Puer. They allow you to live in a simulated world where you're the hero, the lover, and the winner, all while your actual life remains stagnant. This creates a golden shadow, a version of you that is capable of greatness, but is currently trapped in a loop of digital addiction. The emptiness you feel after a binge is the protest of the self. It is a realization that you have spent your most valuable currency, your time and your attention, on ghosts. You have traded your sovereignty for a hit of dopamine that lasts only seconds. Furthermore, these habits create a deep sense of internal shame, which is the greatest killer of ambition. Shame is not guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad, but shame says, I am bad. When you live a life of secret digital compulsions, you develop a shadow that is heavy and dark. This shadow whispers that you are a fraud, that you are weak, and that you don't deserve the success you dream of. This internal conflict creates a psychic friction that makes every task feel 10 times harder than it actually is. You are trying to run a race while carrying a bag of stones. To reclaim your ambition, you must first reclaim your integrity. You must stop the leaks so that your internal pressure can build up again, providing the force necessary to break through the obstacles of the real world. Ultimately, the choice to stop scrolling and consuming porn is a choice to re-enchant the world. When you starve your brain of cheap dopamine, your sensitivity returns. The simple things, a conversation, a workout, a small win in your business, start to feel rewarding again. You move from a state of consumption to a state of production. You begin to see that the world is not a place to be watched through a screen, but a territory to be claimed. Ambition is not something you find. It is a natural byproduct of a clean psyche and a focused mind. By closing the digital portals that drain your energy, you force your libido back into the world of form. where it can finally begin the work of building a life that is actually worth living. The process of reclaiming your ambition starts with the great withdrawal, a psychological period where the ego must learn to survive without the constant hit of artificial stimulation. When you cut off a supply of scrolling and porn, you aren't just changing a habit. You are undergoing a dopamine detox that fundamentally resets your relationship with reality. Carl Jung described the process of Nigredo and alchemy, the blackening, as a necessary stage where the old self must die and decay before the new self can emerge. In the first few weeks of cutting out digital numbing agents, you'll feel a profound sense of boredom, irritability, and even depression. This isn't because your life is bad. It's because your brain has lost its color. You've spent so long in a hypersaturated digital hallucination that the real world looks like a gray wasteland. This gray period is the ultimate test of the warrior archetype. Most people fail here because they mistake the withdrawal symptoms for their true feelings. They think, I feel empty without my phone, so I must need it. In reality, the emptiness is the sound of your dopamine receptors finally beginning to heal. Jung argued that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. You must stay in that gray space without flinching. This is where you rediscover your internal locus of control. When you stop letting an algorithm dictate your mood, you begin to realize that your focus is a muscle that has been allowed to atrophy. By enduring the silence, you are essentially starving the beast of your lower impulses, forcing your psychic energy to seek out new, more productive channels for expression. As the brain resets, a phenomenon occurs that Jung might describe as a return of the soul. Your sensitivity to the small things returns. You start to feel a surge of energy, a restless libido that has nowhere to go. In the past, you would have vented this energy into a screen. Now, with the portals closed, that energy begins to build up behind your eyes. This is the pressure of potential. It manifests as an urgent need to move, to create, or to solve. This is the birth of true ambition. It is no longer an intellectual idea of, I should work hard. It is a visceral, biological demand to engage with life. You find yourself cleaning your room, finishing old projects, and seeking out real-world social interactions because your brain is desperate for connection and achievement. Ultimately, this journey leads to the sovereignty of the self. You realize that the digital world was a labyrinth of the Minotaur, a place where you were wandering aimlessly while your life force was being consumed. By walking out of that labyrinth, you reclaim your status as a creator of reality. You begin to value your time as something sacred rather than something to be killed. Ambition is a natural state of a man who is no longer being drained by ghosts. It is a steady, quiet confidence of someone who has mastered his own impulses and is now ready to master the world. The everything you achieve in the physical world will finally feel full because you are no longer a hollow vessel seeking a hit. You are a whole person making a mark on the world.